The biting wind whipped around Officer Evelyn Evie Reed's face, carrying with it the scent of salt and a pre-winter chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She pulled her collar higher, the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocky coastline of Port Blossom a constant, almost hypnotic soundtrack to her late-night patrol. Port Blossom was a coastal town, a place where the ocean was both a life source and a brooding presence, where fishing boats bobbed like toys and the cries of gulls mingled with the rumble of distant traffic. It was usually quiet, even in the summer months, but tonight, a palpable unease hung in the air, thick as the fog that often rolled in from the sea. Evie, a relatively new addition to the Port Blossom Police Department, with just 5 years on the force, was still getting used to the slower pace compared to the bustling city she'd come from. She missed the constant action, the adrenaline rush, but she was beginning to appreciate the quiet moments, the community feel, the sense of knowing most of the faces she passed on the street. Tonight, however, that quiet was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. She was just about to turn her patrol car onto a side street when her radio crackled to life, interrupting the soft jazz she had been listening to. Dispatch's voice, strained with a mix of urgency and bewilderment, filled the small space of her vehicle. Officer Reed, possible call from a child address is 7 Maple Street. Callers reporting it sounds like a dragon. Evie frowned, her brow furrowing. A dragon? It had to be a prank, a child's imagination running wild. In her short time on the force, she'd fielded calls about everything from imaginary monsters under beds to stolen cookies, but a dragon was a new one. Yet, something in the dispatcher's hesitation, a slight tremor in her voice, made Evie's instincts prickle. She remembered her training, the importance of taking every call seriously, especially when a child was involved. You never knew what someone might be going through or what might actually be happening behind closed doors. Dispatch copy. I'm en route, she responded, her voice calm despite the growing sense of unease settling in her stomach. She flipped on her lights, the blue and red strobes cutting through the darkness, and made her way towards Maple Street, the familiar hum of her patrol car a reassuring constant. Maple Street was a quiet residential area, lined with modest, well-kept houses, each with its own patch of lawn and a few neatly planted trees. Number 7 was a small, 2-story cottage, painted a cheerful yellow, with a porch swing and a small garden that looked a bit neglected in the off-season. As Evie approached, she could hear a faint whimpering sound coming from inside and a strange, high-pitched squeak, almost like a rusty hinge. She pulled her car to the curb and stepped out, the wind tugging at her uniform. The front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the porch. She approached cautiously, her hand resting on her holster, though she doubted a dragon would be stopped by a firearm. She knocked firmly on the door, announcing her presence. "Police, is anyone home?" "It's Officer Reed." Silence answered her for a moment, then a small, trembling voice whispered, "Go away. The dragon is sleeping." Evie knelt, bringing herself closer to the level of the door. "Hi there," she said gently, her voice softening. "It's Officer Reed. I'm here to make sure you're safe. Can you open the door for me, please?" The door creaked open a few inches, and a pair of large, frightened brown eyes peeked out. A little girl, no older than 5, stood clutching a well-worn stuffed fox, her face smudged with dirt and tears. Her blonde hair was tangled, and she was wearing mismatched pajamas that were clearly too big for her. "Is there a dragon here?" Evie asked softly, her gaze fixed on the girl, trying to gauge her level of distress. The girl nodded emphatically, her lower lip trembling. "He's in the kitchen sleeping. He was mad because I said he wasn't real." Evie felt a pang of sympathy for the girl. Clearly, her imagination was working overtime. "Well, maybe I can help with that," she said gently. "Can I come in?" The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly and pushed the door open a little wider. Evie stepped inside, her eyes scanning the small living room. It was cozy, if a little cluttered, with toys scattered on the floor and books piled high on a coffee table. There was a sense of disarray, but nothing that suggested any immediate danger. However, the faint, metallic scent that permeated the air made her stomach churn. It was a scent she knew all too well, the smell of blood. "Where's the dragon?" Evie asked, her voice carefully modulated, trying not to alarm the little girl. The girl pointed a trembling finger towards the kitchen, her eyes wide with fear. "He's in there, sleeping. Be very quiet." Evie approached the kitchen cautiously, her hand once again on her holster. The kitchen was small and messy, with dirty dishes piled in the sink and half-eaten food scattered on the counter. Then she saw it, lying sprawled on the floor, amidst a scattering of pots and pans, was an elderly man, his face pale, his breathing shallow and labored. He had a nasty gash on his head, and a pool of blood was slowly seeping into the linoleum floor. Evie's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a child's imagination. This was a serious emergency. She immediately switched into police officer mode, her calm demeanor masking the surge of adrenaline that coursed through her veins. She rushed to the man's side, checking for a pulse. It was weak, but present. She reached for her radio, her voice calm and authoritative as she spoke into the mouthpiece. "Dispatch. Officer Reed needs immediate medical backup at 7 Maple Street. Unconscious male, head injury, possible fall, code 3. As she relayed the information, she became aware of the small child watching her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She knelt down, bringing herself back to her level. "What's your name?" "Lily," she whispered, clutching her stuffed fox tighter. "Lily, you did a very brave thing by calling for help. You're a very smart girl." Evie forced a reassuring smile, though her heart was pounding with anxiety. "Can you tell me what happened?" Lily looked down at her feet, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa was making breakfast, and he just fell, and then he started to make a funny noise. I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't, and he got all sticky." Evie's heart ached for the child. She had witnessed a traumatic event and was probably terrified. She needed to get her out of the kitchen. "Come with me, Lily," she said gently, leading her by the hand out of the kitchen and into the living room. "Let's sit on the couch. The nice people are coming to help Grandpa." She sat on the worn sofa, pulling Lily into a comforting hug. She noticed a landline phone on a nearby table, the receiver dangling off the hook. Lily had somehow managed to call for help, her tiny fingers navigating a phone she barely knew how to use. The paramedics arrived minutes later, their movements swift and efficient. Evie watched them work, her focus shifting between Lily, who was now quietly sniffling in her arms, and the paramedics, who were working diligently on the unconscious man. She noticed a small, half-finished coloring book on the coffee table, a crayon line nearby, and a box of animal crackers. It was a glimpse into Lily's world, a world that had just been shattered by a sudden and frightening event. As the paramedics prepared to take the man to the hospital, Evie gently led Lily out to her patrol car. "I'm going to take you to a safe place, okay?" she said softly. "You're being so brave. You're doing so well." Lily nodded, her eyes still wide with fear, but she clung tightly to Evie's hand. As she buckled Lily into the passenger seat, Evie's gaze fell on the small stuffed fox, and a memory flickered in her mind, a memory of a little stuffed dog she had cherished as a child. This was more than just a job. This was about protecting the vulnerable, about being there for those who needed her. At the hospital, Evie sat with Lily in the waiting room while they waited for updates on the man's condition. It turned out he was Lily's grandfather, Mr. Silas Blackwood, and that Lily had been living with him. Her parents were on an extended overseas assignment. Mr. Blackwood had a history of health issues and had apparently suffered a stroke. Lily's presence of mind had undoubtedly saved his life. The social worker, Sarah, arrived and gently took Lily to a special room for children where she could play with toys and calm down. Evie, still shaken by the events of the evening, found herself pacing the waiting room. This wasn't just about a medical emergency. It was also about Lily, a little girl who had been left in the care of an aging grandfather with her parents away. There was a vulnerability there that Evie couldn't ignore. She knew she had to report the situation to Child Protective Services. It wasn't an easy decision, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This was more than just an accident. This was a cry for help, a glimpse into a family's life that was teetering on the edge. She remembered her captain, a woman with years of experience and a sharp eye for detail. She knew she needed to seek her counsel. The next morning, after a restless night, Evie walked into Captain Margaret Maggie O'Connell's office. Maggie, a woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart of gold, listened intently as Evie recounted the events of the previous night. "A dragon, huh?" Maggie said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Kids and their imaginations. But it's the instinct to act, Evie, that matters, and you followed it, even when it seemed a little out there." Evie told her about Mr. Blackwood, the stroke, Lily being alone in the house with her grandfather, and the faint but unsettling smell of blood that had churned her stomach. "You did the right thing calling for help, Evie," Maggie said, her voice serious. "And you're right to be concerned. It sounds like there are a lot of layers here, and CPS needs to investigate. Sometimes, being a cop is about more than just enforcing the law. It's about protecting the vulnerable and ensuring the safety of our community. Your instincts are good, so trust them." With Maggie's support, Evie contacted CPS, detailing her observations and expressing her concerns about Lily's situation. She didn't feel good about it, not entirely. She knew that reporting this could potentially lead to Lily being removed from her family, and that was a very scary prospect for a child that had already been through so much. But she felt she had no choice. A few days later, a social worker named Mark visited Mr. Blackwood at the hospital. Mark was a kind and empathetic man, and he took his time getting the whole story. After his conversation with Mr. Blackwood and a meeting with Lily's parents, who had been notified and were on their way home, a picture started to emerge. Lily's parents, Thomas and Olivia, were high-powered executives who had always prioritized their careers over everything else. They had felt guilty about leaving Lily with her grandfather, but had convinced themselves that it was the only solution while they built a life that was, in the end, better for their child. Mark explained that Mr. Blackwood had been struggling to keep up with the energetic Lily, and that the situation wasn't going to work out for either of them. As the social worker continued to evaluate the situation, Evie, despite her busy work schedule, found herself thinking about Lily. She would stop by the hospital after her shift, bringing small toys and coloring books. She found herself gravitating to the young child, drawn in by her vulnerability and her resilience. As Mr. Blackwood's health improved, he was moved to a rehabilitation center. Lily remained in foster care while her parents, devastated by their circumstances, made the difficult choice to start making changes in their lives to become more active parents. They started cutting down on their travel schedule and took courses on parenting that, though they were difficult to complete, ended up teaching them a lot. One afternoon after her shift, Evie visited the rehabilitation center. She found Mr. Blackwood in a wheelchair, a blanket draped over his lap. His face was pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Officer Reed, it's good to see you," he said, his voice weak but sincere. "I wanted to thank you. If it wasn't for you and Lily, well, I might not be here. You both saved my life." It was Lily's quick thinking that made all the difference, Evie said, smiling. "She's a very special girl." Mr. Blackwood nodded. "She is. We both are very lucky to have someone like you in our lives." Evie felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly. "No," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice firm. "You're doing more than that. You cared. You really cared." Evie was silent for a moment. She had tried to keep her distance. After all, she was a police officer. Her job was to enforce the law, not form personal attachments. But she couldn't deny the connection she had formed with this family, and especially with Lily. As Mr. Blackwood's health gradually improved, Lily was able to visit him more often. Evie would often arrange her schedule to be there, too. She would read her books, play games, and draw pictures with the little girl. They would take walks outside. She even took Lily to see the ocean. Lily's curiosity and enthusiasm were a welcome break from the grim realities of Evie's job. One afternoon, after a visit, Lily hugged Evie goodbye. "Thank you for being my friend," she whispered, her eyes bright and innocent. Evie felt her heart swell. It was a simple, honest statement, but it was more meaningful than any medal or commendation she could receive. She realized then that her role as a police officer was about more than just arresting criminals or upholding the law. It was about building relationships, about protecting the vulnerable, and about making a difference in the lives of the people she served. A few months later, after her parents successfully completed parenting courses and proved that they had made significant changes to their lifestyle to put their child first, Lily was finally able to go home. Evie visited Lily and her parents at their house a few days after she returned. She was so happy to see them all. The house was still a bit cluttered, but it was also full of life and love. Lily ran up to Evie and hugged her tight. "You came back," she squealed. "You're gonna stay, right?" "I'll always be around," Evie said, smiling. "I'm your friend. You can count on me." Lily's parents also expressed their gratitude. They were both clearly committed to making their family work and were full of remorse for the way they had neglected their daughter in the past. They thanked Evie for looking out for Lily and for giving them a wake-up call. Evie had done more than just her duty. She had acted on a gut instinct that had saved a life and given a little girl a chance to have a loving and supportive family. She had realized that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery are the small, quiet ones. The acts of compassion, the willingness to connect, the understanding that even the smallest of us can make a huge difference in the world. She had proven that a good police officer is not just about upholding the law. It is about being there for the people, about being a source of support and stability, and about being a friend. Her unexpected call about a dragon had ended up changing all of their lives, and in ways all of them would be forever grateful. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Evie stood by the rocky coastline, the sounds of the ocean echoing in her ears. She knew that her job wasn't always easy. It could be lonely and at times disheartening. But as she felt the familiar chill of the wind against her skin, she knew that she was exactly where she needed to be, and that what she did mattered. Her heart was lighter, her sense of purpose renewed. She would carry the memory of Lily's bravery and her own willingness to act in her heart forever. She was just getting started.